Hello, BookTube. All right, we're continuing with this library tour, my tour of my little book room here. And just like the last time, yesterday, we did a library tour and it had a thematic unity, which is very rare. It doesn't usually happen. I always complain about it, but it isn't really here in this room. And it turns out that the next shelf also has a dramatic unity, a thematic unity. These are all Kennedy books. So if you're not interested in the Kennedys and John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, you're not going to be interested in this shelf at all. And by the same token, much like the last shelf, I imagine this will go fairly quickly because there's only so much that I can say in summary of each one of these books. This is my Kennedy shelf, aside from Reclaiming History by Vincent Bugliosi, which is 1,500 pages long and is down on a bottom shelf. So we'll just go through these and then we'll be done with this shelf. And the first one is about Robert Kennedy. This is Arthur Schlettinger's book, Robert Kennedy and His Times, and this is a trade paperback that I got fairly recently, and as I've commented on this book for half a century now, it ends up being a very effective biography of John Kennedy. I mean, it's effective about Robert Kennedy too, but the story about Robert Kennedy, the biography of Robert Kennedy, should end with his 2 terms in the White House, and it doesn't. And I don't mean that to sound, cruel or brutal, but we wouldn't have 800 biographies of John F. Kennedy if he hadn't had his term in the White House. So, I mean, Robert Kennedy is interesting in his own way. I don't think he's as interesting as a lot of his hagiographers say, but this is not hagiography. This is just incredibly thorough biographical writing, but more about John Kennedy than his brother. Then we have, this is one of 2 books on this subject, I think, here on this shelf. This is James Giglio's The Presidency of John F. Kennedy. No hagiography, no Camelot, no assassination theories, no womanizing stories, no nothing like that. This is just a study of Kennedy's presidency. Just a factual, historical study of his presidency. And there ought to be 100 more books like this. In fact, there are only a few more books like this, so and that's a shame, but you'll find that the shame is represented on this shelf, because this is mostly about, like for instance, this is Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed, which he meant as a death blow to conspiracy theories about Kennedy. He meant as an examination of Lee Harvey Oswald, that in his view, I mean, he examines the forensic evidence and all that, and all the Warren Commission stuff, but in his view, the telltale proof that the single assassination, the lone assassination theory is correct, is the biography of Oswald himself, who in Posner's telling is this increasingly violent, feckless lunatic about whom you could expect that he might fire off shots at the president from the upper stories of the Texas School Book Depository. And it's effective. Posner's a very effective writer. I don't know what you're going to do anymore with him than with Bugliosi. I don't know what you're going to do with a public consciousness that has moved so far into the idea that this did not happen the way the Warren Commission says. It seems to me that after a certain point, you are not really talking about facts anymore. Anyway, this is very similar. This is Philip Shannon's book, A Cruel and Shocking Act. Another big chunker, also about just about the assassination. I mean, this is a shelf of Kennedy books, half of which are about the assassination. I guess that kind of sort of makes sense, but there are half a dozen Kennedy books, John F. Kennedy books, that are really good, that are not here, that I don't have, including a couple of really good biographies that don't center maniacally on the womanizing or the assassination. So I'm, my Kennedy shot, I admit completely I have a fascination with this time period and with this president. This is going to continue to change and grow, because there are half a dozen Kennedy books that I don't have. Looking at the shelf, I see that I don't have them, that I would like. This next one is David Halberstam. This is The Best and the Brightest. This is hardcover of The Best and the Brightest, which is, roughly speaking, a study of Kennedy and his times and his mind and his administration, rather than focusing on the sensational stuff. And it was a mega bestseller in its day. It is still in print, I'm sure. The title has gone into the lexicography. It's gone into the popular usage of American vocabulary. usually used ironically, although Halberstam didn't mean it that way. And as a generational study of a generation of politics and the changing of a generation of politics, it's the reason why it was a bestseller is because it's so engagingly written. It's so enjoyable and thought-provoking to read, even now, an unthinkable half-century later. Okay, this next one is along the same lines. This is one of the premier of what are disdainfully referred to as the court historians of the Kennedy years and the Kennedy administration. This is Ted Sorensen's book, Kennedy. Big thick thing Kennedy, that was hailed as an incredibly thorough account of Kennedy, of his time in office, but also derided as, well, you know, you were one of his entourage, you were one of his people, so of course you're not going to write objective history. Of course you're not going to do your best, and if you encounter your boss in a bad light, you're going to hide it or change it or lie about it. I hate that characterization of these people, of these first-generation Kennedy historians, because they were the best and the brightest, most of them, and it's invaluable to history that they wrote the accounts that they did. These are nothing like the lawyer-vetted and lie-filled anodyne accounts of, for instance, every apparatchik in the Reagan administration, all of whom had been indicted, and all of whom were lawyers, and called in lawyers before they wrote their books, and weren't writing those books the way these guys were. These guys were writing these books with a ghost over their shoulder, and the ghost was Jack Kennedy, who wouldn't have put up with falderall or corner cutting or hagiography in the slightest, not in the slightest, and they knew that, and they couldn't get his voice out of their head while they were writing these books. And in large part, most of them wrote books that Kennedy would have grudgingly approved of, not because they favored him, but because they favored the truth. These things are amazing, and if you read in a dismissive, most accounts of JFK nowadays are dismissive, but if you read an account of JFK that dismissively just disregards these so-called court historians, ignore it. The author doesn't know what they're talking about. Then we have, this is another book. This is by Strober and Strober, very much like the second one that we saw. This is the Kennedy Presidency, only this is an oral history. So here you go through the recollections of the people involved, and it's heavily noted, and it's heavily introduced and edited and whatnot. Very, very valuable book for studying Kennedy as a president, which hasn't been done in anywhere near as much extent as it should be, because it's been the subject has been subsumed in sensationalism for so much of its written record that books like that are valuable. I really like them. Okay, then we have James Douglas. This is JFK and the Unspeakable. Douglas's, to put it mildly, idiosyncratic interpretation of the assassination and what it means, with what it and means all capitalized. I don't know what to make of such books. I like them. They, of course, interest me in a macabre kind of way, but I don't know what to make of them ultimately. Then we have, this is a really good counterpoint to Case Closed. This is Reasonable Doubt by Henry Hurt, which is, even now, after all this time, I think one of the most thoughtful and complete, comprehensive studies of the problems with the standard Warren Commission account of the assassination of JFK. It doesn't cover it all, and some of and as with all books of this kind, it has its ideological weaknesses. It's rabbits that it chases. But I think this is still one of the best reconstructions of or compositions of what you could call the conspiracy view of the assassination of JFK. Now, again, if you're reading an account of JFK and you hear and you read an author just casually dismiss all conspiracy theorists in the assassination as fringe element nut jobs, you can disregard that author. They do not know what they're talking about. Plenty of psychologically sound, funny, well-adjusted, normal, very intelligent men and women have looked at the evidence that was put forward in all of the Warren Commission volumes. I read them all from beginning to end. Plenty of people have looked at that evidence and said, well, no matter what actually did happen, this certainly didn't happen. You don't have to be a nut job to look at the evidence and think that. So Vincent Bugliosi or Gerald Posner, you don't have to be a nut to look at the evidence and say, there are all kinds of things here that don't add up. So, so if you read a dismissive account of JFK that dismisses the conspiracies around his death, you can feel free to dismiss the dismisser, because there is meat on the bone there. And Reasonable Doubt, if you can find a copy, is a good place for you to start, questioning it yourself. It may be that when you're done questioning it, you come to the conclusion that the Warren Commission is largely correct. There is a narrative that you can construct in which disaffected and violent loner Lee Harvey Oswald works at the Texas School Book Depository, knows the president is coming, knows the motorcade route has a chance of coming underneath one of his windows, gets the floor to himself, and gets off the world's luckiest headshot. It is possible to construct a theory that says that doesn't violate, that doesn't do any violence to logic, especially since Oswald had already taken a shot at a public figure. Didn't kill him, but he'd already done that, and that's not disputed by anybody, I don't think. Or, well, in the conspiracy theory world, everything is disputed by everybody, but that largely isn't disputed, that Oswald had already taken a shot at a public figure, and Oswald killed someone that same day, Officer Tippit. So there's a definite, credible narrative line that says, well, obviously this is the guy. So, if you want a place to start to try to start questioning and make decisions of your own, Reasonable Doubt is a good place to start. So are all of these conspiracy theory books that I'm mentioning, although I don't think there are any others. Then this next one is another, probably the most famous example of the quote-unquote court historians. This is 1,000 Days by Arthur Schlesinger. Just terrific. It and Sorensen's Kennedy are just terrific books. No matter what anybody says. The attitude, I don't know what it is about JFK. I think it has to do with generations, with young men and their fathers, who the fathers were part of the World War II generation. They're part of Kennedy's generation, and they're not. I think it's the split, the reason why so many historians and public commentators who are now in their 60s and 70s, but who came of age in the hippie era, I think the reason why so many of them are so quick to just utterly dismiss JFK and anything connected with him has a lot more to do with intergenerational psychology than it does with JFK as a person. When these people, the most famous of which probably is Christopher Hitchens, when they go out on a limb, when they go out onto the ice to try to dismiss not just the idea of the man, but the man and his presidency and all of the facts involved, they tend to go under pretty quick. And I have stopped. I used to make a little cottage industry of reprimanding these people in letters to the editor. They would write a dismissive piece like that, and I would write in right away wherever I saw the piece and say, well, you got this, this, and this fact wrong. We're not talking about interpretation here. We can have different interpretations till the cows come home, but you got these facts wrong. You intentionally got these facts wrong in order to help you dismiss what you had already decided to dismiss. You can go ahead and dismiss it, but the reader should know you got these facts wrong. 1,000 Days is a very good book to read. It's the long point here. And then this next one is another great primary source book. This is The Death of a President by William Manchester. His gigantic book that tore the life out of him to write, that is about not only the assassination, but in large part a lot about the figures who were involved. It originally had the consent of the infamous Kennedy family, and then it didn't, and now it does. And it's I recently got a really nice, a really neat trade paperback of The Death of a President that is somewhere here in this room, and that I mean to replace this hardcover with. There's no reason. I don't. If I reinforce a paperback, it will be good for the rest of my life. I don't need a gigantic hardcover. Okay, this next one is also a hardcover. This is, I admit, a trifle. This is court history. This is by a court historian, in fact, a court jester. All the more valuable for that in some ways. You couldn't lean on it as a historical document. This author would very much have fudged the record to make the boss look good. But a lot of times doesn't. Most of the time doesn't. And so this becomes fascinating. I don't think there's... if you're an author writing a 1,000-page biography of JFK, and I have rumors that such a one is coming in 2020 or maybe 2021, and you don't consult this book, then you are not doing a thorough job, even though the book is a trifle and not historically reliable. And that is Johnny We Hardly Knew Ye. which has listed here, the authors are listed, Ken O'Donnell, David Powers, and Joe McCarthy, but it's David Powers who really was the force behind this book. And it's just a collection of anecdotes, memories, anecdotes, favorite stories, cherished JFK moments. And, you know, as a result of that, it's full of schmaltz and, you know, that kind of boozy Irish wake faux memorializing that doesn't really do anybody any good, but it's not a mortal sin. And there's a kernel in almost every story in that book. There's a kernel of something that a genuine biographer, a genuine historian would find invaluable. Imagine if we had this kind of thing for other historical figures. Imagine how happy we'd be. But when you get to this thing, the people who are going to dismiss everything about JFK that's the first thing they dismiss. Anyway, and then we'll do this last one. Like I figured, this is not a very long mail haul or library tour. This is The Kennedy Half Century by Larry Sabato, which is about not only the Kennedy assassination, but the long shadow that JFK cast on American politics, on American society. So I thought it was very thoughtful, very, very good stuff, worthy of a place on what I guess now I see is my Kennedy shelf. But I want to warn you, or assure you, that those of you who maybe don't like themes, I've heard from quite a few of you, when the first time that we had a theme, I don't remember when it was. It wasn't here. Oh, it was the books about books, the books about books and reviewing. We had several shelves of those. I heard from a lot of people. Keep in mind, I put my email down below. Feel free to email me about anything. I hear about all your lives, and I love to. I heard from several people when we were doing those books about books, that although this is interesting, the writer of the email would say, I kind of like the variety. I kind of like the fact that I don't know what's coming from book to book in these things. In fact, quite a few of you have emailed me and said, please don't organize your little book room, because I'm constantly saying, you know, this shouldn't be here, it should be with all those other books, all the Boston books should be together, all of the biographies should be together, all that sort of stuff. I've had quite a few of you write and say, no, don't do that. It's fine the way it is. And considering the inertia that I feel about the little book room, I probably won't anyway. But anyway, that is it. That is our next bookshelf. All Kennedy books. So I'll wrap this up for now, and tomorrow we will go right back to mind-numbing variety, because this is the last of the themed stuff for the rest of the room. So I'll wrap this up, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.